Today we're going to dive into one of the most famous and tragic events in colonial American history, the Salem Witch Trials. Our spotlight will be on Susannah Martin, a woman who was caught in the whirlwind of accusations and ultimately lost her life because of them. It's a story that reminds us of the dangers of fear, suspicion, and unfair legal practices. We'll walk through Susannah Martin's life, who she was, why she was accused, and what happened during her trial. By the end, you'll see just how important it is to learn about this event, even though it happened over 300 years ago. To understand Susannah Martin, we first need to understand the world she lived in. In the late 17th century, most of the English settlers in Massachusetts were Puritans. The Puritans had left England to practice their faith freely, and they took their religion very seriously. They believed in living strictly according to the Bible and kept watch for the devil's influence everywhere. Many of them thought that when bad things happened, like a sudden illness, poor harvest, or unexpected death, it might be the result of witchcraft. A witch, in their view, was someone, usually a woman, who had made a deal with the devil to get evil powers. In a small, tight-knit community, all it sometimes took was a rumor or a misunderstanding for someone to be branded as a witch. There were two Salems, Salem Village, which is now Danvers, and Salem Town, which remains Salem today. Salem Village was a small farming community, while Salem Town was a wealthier port city. Tensions between them often flared. Salem Village felt overshadowed. Salem Town had the trade, the money, and more social variety. Combine this tension with fear of attacks from conflicts on the frontier, a harsh climate, and strong beliefs in the supernatural, and you had a perfect recipe for suspicion. By early 1692, the Salem Witch Trials began, fueled by accusations from young girls who claimed to be tormented by invisible spirits. At first, the accused were people on the edges of society: Tadaba, an enslaved Caribbean woman; Sarah Good, a homeless beggar; and Sarah Osborne, an older woman who didn't go to church much. But the accusations soon spread beyond Salem Village, to places like Andover, Ipswich, and Salisbury. Even highly respected community members weren't safe from suspicion, and that's where Susannah Martin's story unfolds. Susanna North, later Susannah Martin, was born around 1621 or 1622 in England, though we don't know the exact spot or date. She traveled with her parents, Richard North and Joan Bartram, to the Massachusetts Bay Colony as a child. By the time she reached adulthood, she was living in Salisbury, Massachusetts, near the northern coastal area. In 1646, she married George Martin. The couple had at least 8 children, though not all survived to adulthood. Sadly, that was common in the 16th century when medicine was limited and diseases were poorly understood. Their life was modest. They owned some land and had ongoing property disputes, like many families of the time. To get by, most families in Salisbury farmed. They had to work from sunrise to sunset, managing crops, livestock, and household duties. The Puritan church strongly governed daily life. People who missed Sunday services might face fines or community scorn. Superstitions and a deep fear of the devil's work lingered in many hearts, especially when something unexplainable happened, like a sudden illness or a calf dying mysteriously. Susannah was known to be independent-minded. She didn't shy away from speaking out or defending herself, especially in court if she felt she was wronged. This attitude might have caused friction in a society that expected women to be meek and submissive. For some neighbors, her outspokenness fed suspicion. One remarkable detail about Susannah Martin is that she had already faced witchcraft allegations before the famous Salem hysteria. In 1669, William Sargent accused her of bewitching his wife. The case went to court, but ultimately the charges were dropped due to lack of solid evidence. Even so, rumors from an old accusation don't just disappear. In a community where superstitions were strong, having once been accused could follow you like a shadow. More than 2 decades later, when the witchcraft scare took over Salem and its neighboring towns, people remembered this prior incident and used it as evidence against her. By 1692, Salem Village had become the epicenter of witchcraft accusations. But it didn't stay isolated for long. People in Andover, Ipswich, Topsfield, and Salisbury also fell under suspicion. The so-called afflicted girls, who said they were tormented by invisible spirits, named more and more people. often spectral evidence, claims that a person's spirit attacked or pinched them, was accepted in court, even though it was invisible to everyone else. The special court formed to handle these cases, the Court of Oyer and Terminer, relied heavily on these spectral claims. Normally, you'd want solid physical proof for a crime, but in 1692 Massachusetts, the fear of witches was so strong that many thought spectral evidence was legitimate. If the afflicted said your spirit attacked them, it was considered persuasive evidence in court. It was in this fearful environment, where a previous suspicion of witchcraft was like a spark on dry wood, that Susannah Martin's name came up again. By May 2, 1692, Susannah Martin's warrant for arrest was issued. The constables traveled from Salem village to Salisbury to apprehend her. She was around 70 years old at this point, a considerable age in the 16th century. She was then transported to Salem village for questioning, what they called an examination, a preliminary hearing before the actual trial. The afflicted girls would claim Susannah's specter was present, tormenting them, pinching them, and causing them to cry out. They might collapse on the floor or scream as if in pain. To onlookers who believed in witchcraft, these fits seemed genuine and damning. Susanna also had a bit of wit or sarcasm, which didn't sit well with the Puritan authorities. The judges saw it as disrespectful. Women accused of witchcraft were often searched for witches' marks, moles, scars, or birthmarks that examiners claimed were the devil's mark. At around 70, Susanna's body would naturally have blemishes. Nonetheless, any unusual spot could be twisted into proof of witchcraft. Susannah Martin was formally indicted by a grand jury. The indictment charged her with exercising certain detestable arts called witchcraft and sorceries upon various individuals. Susannah Martin never confessed. She stood by her innocence. There are accounts that she challenged the evidence with quick responses, refusing to appear guilty. Ultimately, the court found Susannah Martin guilty of witchcraft. In the Salem Witch Trials, a guilty verdict meant a death sentence by hanging. Once declared guilty, there was little chance of a reprieve. Susannah Martin was executed on July 19, 1692. She was one of 5 women hanged that day at Proctor's Ledge in Salem. The others were Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Rebecca Nurse, and Sarah Wilds. Public executions were common in the 16th century. A crowd gathered to watch, some out of fear, others maybe out of curiosity. After the hanging, their bodies were cut down and placed in unmarked graves. Witches were generally denied Christian burial rites. By late 1692, more people, including local ministers and eventually Governor William Phips, grew wary of the witch trials. They realized that spectral evidence and teenage girls' fits might not be reliable. But for Susannah Martin and 19 others executed, it was too late. By May 1693, the trials were over, and most accused individuals were released from prison. In the years following 1692, the community wrestled with guilt. Judges and jurors admitted they had made mistakes. Over time, Massachusetts tried to make amends by clearing the names of the victims. Formal apologies were made by the colony in 1607, and in the centuries that followed, more legislative acts officially exonerated those wrongfully executed. Susannah Martin's name, like many others, was eventually cleared. In 1957 and again in 2001, Massachusetts passed measures exonerating any who hadn't been previously named. Today, descendants of Salem Witch Trials victims and the accused live across the United States. Genealogical research often leads people to discover they are related to someone caught in that tragic event. For them, it can be both shocking and meaningful to realize the personal connection to a piece of history they may have studied in school. Susannah Martin's story is both heartbreaking and enlightening. She lived as a hardworking mother, endured previous witchcraft allegations, and found herself caught in a storm of fear that ended at the gallows. Though we can't change what happened to her and the others, we can honor their memory by continuing to ask questions, challenge unfounded accusations, and encourage fairness in all aspects of society. Thanks for watching. If you found this video interesting, hit the like button, share it with your friends, and consider subscribing for more deep dives into history.